Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of Student of the Gun Radio. We weren't planning on doing this week, but circumstances dictated that we absolutely had to get in front of the microphone. And as you've read the title, it's Fort Hood, the Definition of Insanity. Now, when the original Fort Hood attack, the first one with the, wasn't an attack, I'm sorry. When the original incident of workplace violence happened, I was actually working as a military contractor on a base. And what I found strange or funny is family and relatives and friends, that they ask, they're like, well, I don't understand. How could that happen? Aren't all the soldiers armed? How could someone just walk around murdering soldiers helplessly? Well, that's because you and your family and your relatives and all of those of you sitting out there in your reasonable chairs, you would assume, quite mistakenly, that all these guys walking around in camouflage uniforms that you see, in the airports and the grocery stores or wherever you happen to see them, that the soldiers and Marines and airmen and so forth, that they have guns because, well, that's what you do when you're in the military, right? Is they teach you how to use guns and they teach you how to fight. So if anyone in the world could be trusted to be armed, you would think it would be a soldier. Well, you would be wrong, because your government does not trust members of the United States military to be armed. That's right. The Department of Defense, by extension, the United States government, does not trust active duty members of the United States military to be armed. You're thinking and you're saying to yourself, that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. It's one of the stupidest things I've heard all week. Well, how about, okay, well, maybe not, and I know you guys are reasonable out there. You're kind of leaning towards let's be reasonable. All right. You say, well, I can understand that not everyone in the military, not everyone in the Army or Navy or Marine Corps, they're not all in the infantry. They're not all MPs. They're not all, they don't specialize. There's some people, there's lots of people that are in the medical field, or they're in logistics, or they drive trucks or whatever. So I can see those people, not having guns. But certainly the people whose job in the military it is to fight, veterans, war veterans, infantrymen, special forces, recon, SEALs, you name it. Those guys, now, they're all armed when they're, that would be a big no. And you say, well, why is that? Well, I can tell you this. I'm going to let you guys in on a little bit of a secret. This didn't just begin. It's been this way for a long, long time. It was this way when I was in the military, when I was active duty Marine Corps back in the late 80s and early 90s, way before the big push for concealed carry permits and so forth. Service members, Marines, Navy, Army, were forbidden to be armed unless they were specifically on duty at that moment in time, and they'd been issued a military firearm, an issue or a duty gun. But otherwise, they just walked around. And you got to remember the old Cold War Army, the old Cold War Marine Corps, we didn't actually wear our utilities or our uniforms off base. It's not like it is today where when you go to Walmart or when you go to the airport, or everybody who's in the military, because why? Well, because they're all wearing their camouflage utility uniforms. It didn't used to be that way. And so it wasn't quite so easy to single out military members in public as it is today. Now, we're going to talk about the Fort Hood shooting, but what we need to remember is there have been several shootings, and I've written about them, of active duty military members, of members in uniform that were not on base. We had a situation where it was an IHOP, right? Jared, you remember that? With 4 or 5 National Guardsmen in an IHOP. Guy walks in, opens fire on them. They're all in uniform. Another situation at a recruiting center where 2 guys are standing outside in front of the recruiting center, and a little wannabe Johnny jihadist walks up and opens fire on them. And we said this years ago. I mean, literally years and years ago, that until we start arming our troops, this is going to keep happening. And the knee-jerk pushback is, Well, what are you saying? Are you trying to say that you think that soldiers, that these guys in the military all need to be armed? Gee, no. I want people in the military to not be armed. What the heck is the military for? Well, if you're a hip person, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, you may realize that the United States military today is not what the military was 50, 100 years ago, where you were in the military to fight. Well, today we're not really so much about fighting wars. We're about police actions, and we're about handing out pillows and Meals on Wheels and peacekeeping forces, and we're trying to use our military as the world's policemen rather than to go to war, win the war as quickly as physically, humanly possible, and then come back. We get into these prolonged peacekeeping missions and, nation building efforts and so forth. And I think even the most pro-military patriotic people in the United States of America today are very war weary. They're tired of it. They're tired of sending their sons and daughters overseas to get their legs blown off, their arms blown off, to be killed, to come home in coffins. For what? For what? For a bunch of ungrateful people who really just look at them as targets of opportunity? What are we doing today with our military? Well, it's no surprise to you if you're listening to the sound of my voice. It's no surprise to you that right now today's military is being used, and it always has been to a certain extent, but today even more so than ever before, as this some kind of grand social experiment where things that the government can't force you as the citizen to do because you still have this nasty little thing called freedom. You got a little bit of it left, not a lot, but just a little. But they can force it upon our military because essentially they're hostages. They're prisoners on their bases. So all the political correctness that they really want you to do, but they can't force upon you, they can force upon our military. And that's what's going on right now. I tell you what, I wouldn't go back in today, and I would not recommend that my child or anyone else's child go into the military today. And I know that, and that hurts me. That hurts my heart because I come from a military family. All the way back to 1776, people in my family have been in either the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps. They fought in all the major conflicts that this nation has been in. And here in today in 2014, I think that we're at such a state of affairs where that we cannot honestly say that the people that are joining the military right now, that they're being used to do their job, which is to defend the nation against, foreign aggression. That seems to be way in the back seat. You say, well, all right, Paul, you're so smart. Well, what do you think they should do? Well, let's take the Fort Hood part out. Let's take the military part out. Let's take the part of the base out. Let's just call it X. What is Fort Hood? It is a gun-free zone, right? The only people that are allowed to be armed on Fort Hood are what? Special members of the state, the DOD gate guards, and military police. Certain members are allowed, but not the general population. Gee, where in the world do we see very similar situations? New York City, Chicago, our public schools, major malls and metropolitan areas. What are those? They're all gun-free zones. And where do we have the greatest number of atrocities? Well, would it be gun-free zones? You're like, yeah, but it's different because it's a military base. How is it different? You take the population, you pile them into a specific area, you disarm them, and it's not just disarming them. If, let's say, a soldier feels like he really needs to protect himself or he wants to be responsible and protect himself with arms, if he gets caught, he gets court-martialed and he goes to jail. Think about that for a second. So we actually threaten these guys to keep them disarmed. And after the original Fort Hood, the original workplace violence incident, we're not allowed to call it what it was because that might hurt someone's feelings. We're afraid to hurt the feelings of the enemy of our nation. We're afraid to hurt the feelings of radical Islam. Can you imagine this? I know some of you are young out there and you have like absolutely no understanding of history, but can you imagine that if in the early 1940s that our government was more concerned with not offending people of German descent than they were of winning the war? I think the East Coast would be speaking German right now and the West Coast would be speaking Japanese because we would have lost. Thank God that back in the 40s we had a population and the will to win. I don't know if we have that today. I don't know if it's there anymore. But after the original Fort Hood shooting with Major Nidal Hasan, who just happened to be, workplace violence there, what did they do? And rather than say, well, what did we do wrong here? They ramped up. The Army actually ramped up their gun control on soldiers by telling soldiers that not only were they forbidden to be armed on post, but then telling them that they had to report whether or not they had firearms in their homes. And we saw a story, I was looking, I think it was NBC News, but don't quote me on that. But they said that the shooter in question in this particular incident, the one that happened on, as I record this yesterday, that because he lived off base and purchased the gun, that he was able to skirt or get away with not registering his firearm. You get that? That's what the left thinks. They think that, well, yeah, if he would have been forced to register his gun, then that wouldn't have happened. Really? Really? Okay. So what we have to do is we have to examine this situation and determine, are we going to be slow learners? What is the definition of insanity? Jared asked me, 2 weeks ago? Was it 2 weeks ago or last week on the radio? Jared said, Dad, what's the definition of insanity? And it's doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. If you apply the same solution to a problem and it fails, so you decide, well, yeah, it failed the first time, but we're just going to keep trying it over and over and over again until it works. It's not going to work. It's not going to get any better. It's just going to continue to get worse. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that this hasn't happened more often instead of less often. So what is the solution? What is the solution? And why does this happen? Well, I'm going to share a story with you real quick, if you'll indulge me. Way back in the early 90s or so, I was working as a police officer. I was just a new police officer. And back in the 90s, what we had is you had hundreds, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of recently discharged military veterans, because we'd just gone through the first Desert Storm. And what happened in the early 90s? They decided, oh, we don't need all these people. So they started pushing people out of the Army, the Marine Corps, and so forth. They're like, hey, we don't need you to be here anymore. You go ahead and get out. And what did a lot of those guys do? They did exactly what I did. They took their GI Bills. They went to the police academy. They went to a sheriff's academy, and they got themselves a sheriff certification, a police certification, a state peace officer certification. And what I found was when I would go to these civil service exams, or I'd answer an ad for police officers wanted and so forth, there might be 2 or 3 or 4 positions open, and you had 3, 4, sometimes up to 500 people at a civil service exam to fill 3 positions. And then I also discovered that in the early 90s, what you'll remember is we had a whole ton of political correctness going on and affirmative action. And that at the time I was a little bit too Caucasian, a little bit too male to get pushed to the top of the hiring stack. And so I took jobs as when I first started out with small towns, part time, and so forth. 20 hours a week here for this community, this police department. Well, one of the agencies I worked for had actually it was a small. There's like a few thousand people in the city, and I got hired on to work part time, 20 hours a week. And the policy of the department at the time was only full-time officers are allowed to carry off-duty. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, were you a real police officer? Well, yeah, when I had my polyester uniform on, I was a real police officer. I could arrest people and take them to jail, and I could pull people over and write them tickets, and I could investigate crimes, and I carried a real gun and everything, and they let me put bullets in it. I didn't have to keep it in my shirt pocket. You young kids won't get that. But the policy was you're not only full-time officers are allowed to carry off-duty. And I was talking to a good friend of mine, Walt Roush, and I mentioned that to him, and he said, well, Paul, let me tell you what it is. He said, you're looking at it as an officer safety issue. You're thinking, well, it doesn't matter whether you work, if you work 20 hours, 25, 35, 40, 42 hours, whatever. You're still, when you're off duty, you're still a police officer, right? You don't stop being a police officer when you take off your polyester uniform. And you're thinking, well, what if you encounter bad people you've previously arrested when you're, quote, off duty? And this is way back in the early 90s when there was no provision for concealed carry in Ohio. You couldn't lawfully get a concealed carry permit. The only way you could get it was a special license issued by the state. So, and he said, Paul, you're looking at it from an officer safety standpoint. He goes, the chief and the city council are looking at it from a liability standpoint. The last thing they want is you using a gun to stop a crime or protect your life when you're off duty. Because let's just say that you're 100% in the right and you have to shoot someone when you're off duty. And it turns out that you're an off-duty police officer from this municipality. He goes, even if you're 100% right, chances are high that the deceased scumbag's family is going to try and sue the city for something. They're going to try, or he goes, God help you if you're involved in a gunfight and somebody who wasn't supposed to get shot, an innocent bystander, catches a bullet. That's liability. He said, they're more worried about their liability than they are your life. And I said, that's kind of cynical. He said, think about it like this, Paul. He said, dead cops make good press. And I looked at him, and Walt has been around the block many, many times. And he said, think about it like this. He said, let's say, he goes, you're unarmed, off duty, and you get into an altercation and you get killed. So you're dead. All right. He said, does the agency or the department have an insurance policy on you? I looked at him and he shook his head. He said, they have a policy on you. Okay. They've got a policy on you. So your wife comes to them and says, hey, my husband's dead now. And they said, that's cool. We've got a policy. Here's your life insurance policy. Move on. And what else happens? I said, and I looked at him. He said, well, they write newspaper articles. They do television news stories about this poor little municipal police officer who got killed off duty. And so everybody feels bad for the agency. And I looked at him. He's like, follow me. He goes, so everybody feels bad for the department, right? He goes, does anyone go to the department and say, it's your fault that this officer got killed off duty? No, they never do. He said, they feel sorry for the department. He said, for the chief, the next time he presents his budget to the mayor and the city council, there is no way they're going to turn down his budget request. He just had an officer killed. He's going to get everything he wants. The city is going to get sympathy. The insurance is going to pay off your widow. He goes, it's a win-win-win for him. He goes, conversely, if you use a firearm off duty and you get sued, everyone's angry, everyone's annoyed. Sure, you still get to be alive, but that's not really the point. Apply that same thing to the United States military today. And this isn't just today. This is going on way back. How many of you know that about the 1983 Beirut the barracks bombing? How many of you know that the guys out at the gates had empty guns? You're thinking, why in the world would officers in the military order their men to have empty or unloaded guns? Because officers are politicians. Sorry, if you're an officer, it's going to hurt your feelings. But most military officers are career people. Think about it like this. Go back to the police example. You have little Johnny PFC out at the gate, and little Johnny PFC has a rifle or a pistol or what have you. and little Johnny PFC has a negligent discharge, has an accidental discharge, points his gun at someone it shouldn't be pointed at, it all falls back on you, the officer, the commanding officer, whether you're a captain or major or colonel, whatever. It falls back on them. Oh, your little PFC had a negligent discharge, or your little PFC shot someone who shouldn't have been shot. Now go back to the same thing. What if the little PFC is out on duty and he gets killed? Does anyone look at the colonel and say, Colonel, your PFC got killed and it's your fault? No. No, they say, this is terrible. This is horrible. We need to find who did this, and we need to make them pay and hold them responsible and so forth. They're more afraid of the soldiers actually having live ammunition than they are about the soldiers getting killed. Hey, if you're little Johnny PFC and you get killed, you got SGLI, your parents or your wife or whoever is your next of kin, they get a paycheck. Everyone feels bad for the command. They have a ceremony, fold up the flag, do all that stuff. No one will ever go back to them. You're a greater liability as an armed trooper than you are unarmed. And you say, well, that's really super cynical of you, Paul. It is super cynical, but it is also 100% right on. We make these mistakes over and over and over again. I just saw an article, and I'm sorry, I can't remember where I saw it, but it said that troops in Afghanistan ordered to carry unloaded weapons, unless they're specifically involved in a combat operation, which is a joke anymore in Afghanistan. Talk to anybody who's been there recently. Combat operations in Afghanistan are a joke.
So, can I say something?
Hey, Jared is heard from.
Sorry, I'm here in spirit, I promise. This whole situation has made me physically sick, I think. If you are patrolling, okay, say you don't go out on a combat mission or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you are ambushed, doesn't that become a combat mission or situation?
Well, I'll do you one better. What happens when the indigenous security guards that are on the base decide that they're going to go get their virgins and they're going to pull Johnny Jihad on you, and they turn their issued gun on you and start shooting? But you're walking around on base in supposedly the secure area. And you say, what are you talking about, Paul? That happened. That has happened multiple times on bases. So there is no such thing as a green zone. It's an illusion. And what you've got is you have politicians, you have career officers, you have people who put their careers and their political careers or military careers, they put those ahead of the lives of the individual soldiers. And that is absolutely what is going on. And if you think I'm wrong, write me a letter, call me, tell me I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. I'm 100% spot on. Because it's ridiculous. It's insane. It is insanity. I can't even fathom a general. And we saw it yesterday afternoon. I saw another. The commanding officer of Fort Hood came out and defended his policy of disarming all troops, of making them be disarmed, and does not plan to change that anytime in the future. So we might just have an award for him sometime real soon. Now, I'm going to talk about this real quick, and then we're going to let you guys go from the special edition. Now, you're not surprised. I'm not surprised. But we came up with a story when we were prepping for the show notes, and this comes from the Communist News Network, Charlie November. And the talking head from the Communist News Network, a Chris Cuomo, he wondered aloud about the shooter with mental health issues. That's something that we're not supposed to talk about. We're not supposed to talk about the fact that the shooter in this case was on psychiatric medication. What? You mean there's a pattern of behavior for people that are on psychiatric medication and go on shooting sprees? But don't the pharmaceutical industry, the big pharmaceuticals, don't they donate millions upon billions of dollars to various political campaigns, both R's and D's, every year? Oh, they do. So we don't talk about that. Do your own research. But, so the shooter in case, not only did he possess a gun, but he was on psychiatric medicine. Well, this is what Mr. Cuomo said. Even though he had mental health issues, he said, Why was he able to walk into a private store and get this semi-automatic handgun? Because, semi-automatic, when you work for the Communist News Network, you have to throw that in there to make it sound really super scary.
Did it have a gunpowder chamber?
It probably had a gunpowder chamber. I don't know. It might have had a gunpowder chamber. He might have been able to shoot someone from a mile away. No, probably not. So he says, why was he still able to walk into a private store and get a semi-automatic handgun that he winds up using? Not a military-issued weapon, but his own. So let me get this right, Chris. If he would have used an M9 Beretta that he got out of the armory, that would be better somehow than, I don't know, thinking. And he says, and Chris finishes by saying, don't you think that's something that needs to be addressed in terms of who's able to get these concealed carry permits and weapons? What now? So according to the talking head on the Communist News Network, we need to have a discussion about who is allowed to have concealed carry permits and buy these weapons. I got an idea, Chris. How about we have a discussion about the good people being forcibly disarmed so that they're helpless? Can we talk about that for a second? Can we talk about the abject and total failure of the left's gun control efforts in the United States? And how it's a complete and total sham, how it is a lie? Hey, Chris, how do you feel about members of the state owning firearms and carrying firearms? Do you think that's okay? I bet you if Chris was here, he'd say, well, yeah, they have to. That's their job. So the state can be allowed, but thou peasants, you're fodder. You can just be killed whenever we feel like it. Ask a gun control advocate. Ask your Aunt Sally or the guy at work who thinks that we shouldn't have guns, or the idiot gathered around the water cooler talking about this. And this just proves we need more gun control. Say, we could have gun control tomorrow. We could get rid of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of guns could be gone tomorrow morning, could be destroyed, melted down. Do you think that would be a good idea? Less guns on the street, right? And they'll look at you and they're like, oh, yeah. Well, all right now, every major law enforcement agency in America could go empty out their armories, get those evil, evil black rifles, and melt them down. Well, that's just stupid. Really? I thought you were against guns. I thought you were afraid of guns on the streets. Oh, so what it turns out is you're not really opposed to guns on the streets. You're just opposed to who has possession of them. So you think the peasant should be disarmed, but the state should be armed, but only certain members of the state. Folks, it's a lie, and it's the definition of insanity. I don't care whether it's a mall, a school, a church, a city, or a military base. As long as you set up a quote-unquote gun-free zone, eventually bad people will get weapons and kill good people. One of our fans sent us a story did you see the story about the smuggled gun into the prison? Yeah. If we're talking about security, and Dwight Eisenhower said, if you want security, go live in a prison. It's the most secure environment you could be in, because you're just missing one thing: freedom. If you can smuggle a gun into a prison, I think you can smuggle a gun into pretty much anywhere else. So we cannot, I've said, how many more times do I need to say you can't sterilize the world, Jared? I've been saying it since 2006, but I'm going to keep saying it. You cannot sterilize the world. The only thing you can do is you can prepare people to deal with it. You can either disarm them or you can allow them to be armed. And I know there are people out there that want to be sheep, that don't want to be armed, that just want to leave their safety and security up to someone else. That's cool. But I'm not that guy. Why do I have to be disarmed because you want to be a sheep? Now, folks, thank you for joining us for this special edition of Student of the Gun Radio. We appreciate you being out there. We appreciate Keltec Firearms. We appreciate Crossbreed Holsters. We appreciate Colt for making that LE901. And, of course, our friends at Excess Sights. We appreciate all of them for being with us and giving us the opportunity to come out and talk to you. Now, remember, I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to be a student. I want you to read. I want you to think. I want you to question. I want you not just to be a beginner. I want you to be a student for life.